All right, here we go. Take one. Repetitive compulsive behaviors is what our topic is of today. Now, some disorders are classified as impulse control disorders, while some have their own classifications, such as eating disorders. Now, I don't want people to get confused with impulse control disorder and obsessive compulsive disorder. So I want to actually explain the differences between these two. So an impulse control disorder is somebody that is unable to resist an impulse that is harmful to the person involved in the behavior or others, but it started out as pleasurable. Also, usually there's a rising sense of tension or arousal before committing the act, followed by gratification, pleasure, and then guilt over the consequences of the behavior. Now, obsessive compulsive disorder is engaging in a repetitive activity, but not for pleasure, but to reduce anxiety that's caused by obsessive thinking or obsessive thoughts. Addictive behaviors alter brain chemistry in very similar ways as a psychoactive drugs do. And the reasons why people engage in a compulsive behaviors are really the same reasons why people engage in compulsive drug use. You got to get a rush, overcoming boredom, forgetting problems, controlling anxiety and depression, and to alter their state of consciousness. Now, my guest today is Patrick Chester, who has struggled with a behavioral addiction that has destroyed millions of lives. And I want you to stay tuned, and I'll see you in a minute. My name is Eric McCoy, and it is time to get high while clean. Now, I want to give a quick thing. This is actually a take two, as my guest and I talked for almost an hour yesterday before I realized that we weren't recording. But I had done a podcast on behavioral addictions, and probably about 7 months ago. And I discussed how closely they intertwined within substance abuse. And all the symptoms of behavioral addictions and chemical addictions, according to the DSM-5, are exactly the same, except one: tissue dependency. Now, as we had recorded yesterday, I had kind of explained a little bit in terms of the similarities. And specifically today, we are going to talk about gambling. Now, drug users have a compulsion to use as they think about it most of the time. You know, there's a tolerance as they need more to get the similar effects. Withdrawal, when they stop, the individual will continue to use despite negative consequences, which is at the core of chemical dependency. They also have a strong tendency to use again after quitting. It's what we call relapse. Now, when the word using is replaced with gambling, we can see that compulsion is not limited to psychoactive substances. Compulsive gamblers think about gambling most of the time. That's compulsion. Tolerance, as they increase their bets. Many of them get restless and discontent when they're not gambling, which is what we would probably classify as psychological withdrawal. They will continue gambling regardless of how much they lose. They go into denial as they believe that they can control it. And just as relapse occurs with a lot of people with substance abuse, a lot will maybe return to gambling if they have money in their pocket. The specific behavioral addiction is a symptom of the illness. And the illness is what we would classify as addiction. And my guest today, Patrick Chester, is probably what we can call a recovering pathological gambler, which adds the element from a problem gambler of obsessive persistence, which is a continual and significant disruption in probably most, if not all, areas of his life. He spent 15 years as a gambling addict. He has lost millions and destroyed his family. How does someone do this? Well, that's what we're going to find out. Patrick, I want to thank you for joining me today.
Eric, I appreciate the opportunity to be with you. Looking forward to it.
Absolutely. I'm excited about this. And, we were talking yesterday, and, I have one of my students, as we talk about this in my class, and we go into behavioral addictions along with obviously chemical abuse. And so one of my students is actually very excited to hear this podcast because he had a lot of questions related to this, But compulsive gambling is a progressive disease, just like with chemical abuse. And then the main difference, of course, between the problem and the pathological gambler is time and money. How did you accumulate the money to be able to lose millions of dollars?
Eric, it started, I was working for myself as a contractor, back around 2009, 2010 is really when I started doing that. And before that, I had a regular job like everybody else. And so until I started working for myself, I didn't have the resources. I didn't have the avenues, so to speak, to get the big money that I needed to gamble with towards the last 5, 6, 7 years. But at that point, I was accepting large checks from customers. They were giving me $15,000, $20,000, $30,000 checks for deposits for big projects. And to a gambling addict, what's the drug? To me, it was money, and somebody hands a gambling addict $30,000. That's a challenge, and so that's, for a while there, that's how I was getting my money to gamble.
Now initially, when most people, go into this type of addiction, normally it starts out as pleasurable. I mean, obviously there's nothing that we would ever do repetitively to continue doing unless it started out as pleasurable and enjoyable. And when you started this, when you had kind of got into gambling, what was that like for you as far as the pleasure involved? Was it a big win that took you to that place of compulsion or being a problem gambler?
Yeah, I think that was the thrill of it initially, whether it was $200 or $300. I remember, probably would have been around the early 2000s. I think I was a sports bettor primarily. I bet on sports, football, baseball, basketball, whatever. I hit a parlay. I remember $900. It paid me about $900, and that sucked me in. I think it was moments, moments like that early on when I was, playing with maybe $100 here or $200 there, but an $800 or $900 win at the time was a big deal to me, and that sucked me in for sure.
Now, is it something that you don't really think about in terms of loss? I got a guy that I know who he came to me one day and he showed me his end, he got his tax stuff from the casino that he would, gamble with, which was Pachanga. And he showed me the form as like if he was really excited. And I was looking at it and I was reading it. He won $1.2 million, but was $95,000 in the negative. And is that something that really you think about? I mean, and I was really contemplating this, that, if I'm out there gambling and I'm winning money, right? I'm like, oh, this is great. I'm winning money. Then I start losing money. And then I have to go get more money. And then you sort of lose track of how much where you're actually at. Are you in the up or are you in the down?
So what happened to me, Eric, was we just talked about, the the thrill early on, and it's somewhere in there, probably around 2005, somewhere around that time frame, I crossed over from, what could be considered maybe a problem gambler to a compulsive gambler. And it's like you just described, it's the wins and the losses to me were almost irrelevant. Because even when I won, all I was going to do was just double it up again on something else until I lost. It becomes this repetitive cycle where, the thrill of it is almost, the thrill is placing the bet, doing the homework. At least that's what it was for me, researching this and finding, okay, I want to bet 1,500 on this. And then once the game's over, whether I won or lost, it was almost anticlimactic. It was because I knew that eventually I was just going to lose that money, and then it becomes this, then when I'm out of money, then it becomes this game of chase and this game of hustle, where I'm trying to convince customers to trust me to give me a check for 10 or 15 grand so that I can continue this pattern.
Yeah. Now you had evolved into crime.
That's correct.
You went from the problem gambler to the pathological gambler to the criminal.
That's exactly what happened to me, and I didn't realize my mind was so clouded. I was so detached from reality that I couldn't really process what I was doing. I knew it was wrong, but in our mind, in the gambler's mind, compulsive gambler's mind, we have a way of rationalizing every decision we make. We have a way, at least I did. I always convinced myself, well, I may accept $15,000 or $20,000 from this person, but I'm not going to take it and just hit the road. I'm going to honor my word with them, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that money and I'm going to double it up over here by winning or gambling and put it all on a game over here. I'm just going to win more and then I'm going to pay them off, and so it becomes this vicious cycle where we can convince ourselves of just about anything we want to.
Yeah. And so you got arrested for embezzling funds.
So what I did, so what happened was I was accepting money from customers, and then it becomes the narrative was, well, this is just a shady contractor. You hear about these people all the time. Some guy shows up at your door and says he can do a job, and you write him a check and you never see him again. And that's what people were starting to say about me, when in fact that wasn't it at all. But it ended up going to the state and the prosecutors, and eventually I was charged with 2 counts of first-degree theft for this, and it ended up being sentenced to jail because of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the true definition, again, of again, if we're talking about chemical abuse or behavioral abuse, is the continuing to use despite negative consequences. Bad things happen, but you're always seeking that pleasure. You're always seeking that enjoyment, maybe, of what you remembered or what it used to be like. And now you had brought up too that you had basically destroyed your family, and but your wife knew nothing about it. I remember us talking about that.
Yeah. So my wife was in the dark. There were a lot of red flags. We were married back in 2006. And so from that point until 2015, when this all blew up and I ended up going to treatment and then eventually jail. So that's a long stretch of time. That's almost 10 years. And she knew that I gambled a little bit here and there, but she had no idea. There were a lot of red flags going on. There were, bill collectors calling. There were sheriffs showing up at her work and serving her with papers that she had no idea. She had no idea what they were about. It was all related to me and my, my behaviors and my choices and things I was doing behind the scenes that she didn't know anything about. And so, she always had questions, but she never really could pinpoint what the root of it was.
And there wasn't concerns behind like having no money. Was that?
Well, I was able to cover it up, really. Until the very end, until the last couple of years when we lost our house and ended up having to rent a house and got kicked out of there. And ended up living at my in-laws' house, I was always able to borrow money from somebody or find money somewhere, or like we just talked about, resort to criminal activities to get money. I did everything short of robbing a bank, and so I was able to cover it up for a long period of time. And as gamblers, compulsive gamblers, we're pretty creative.
Yeah.
We can come up with all sorts of scenarios. And when we're questioned on something, my wife would question me on this stuff all the time, but I was always able to convince her, that it wasn't me, or there was a mistake, or let me handle it. I don't know why the bank froze your account, honey, but let me call them. I'll take care of it. And when sometimes, I don't know if this is true or not, but this is how I think. I think the closer you are to somebody, especially your spouse, you always want to believe them. You don't want to believe the worst, and if you're removed, if you're detached from that a little bit, sometimes it's easier to recognize what's really going on.
Now, are you still with your wife? Is she?
I am. I am. We have, not only did I start over in 2015 with treatment and then jail, and I've been living a life of recovery ever since. I had a marriage to rebuild, and she gave me the chance. She wasn't, I destroyed her credit. I destroyed the trust, obviously, between us. All of it was gone. And she even lost friends over this. And so, but she did give me the opportunity to gain her trust back. And, in 6 years, we together have rebuilt our marriage, and we have a second son who we didn't have before this. So things are really good. Looking back 6 years, it's amazing where we're at now.
When you're in recovery, obviously we have, so like for me, I'm clean, I'm sober. How do you define that for a gambler?
I always describe it as I've been clean for 6 years now. That's how I view it, and another way I describe it is I'm free of the monster of addiction. That was a daily battle that I lived from the time I woke up until the time I went to bed. That was exhausting, and so you live that way for many, many years like I did. And to be able to wake up and just take a shower and go to work like most people do and not have to live a lie for the next 16 hours before I go to bed is an amazing feeling. So I feel clean. And that's how I describe it. I'm living a clean life now.
Yeah. And so you went into treatment, and, I kind of picture, as I have worked with people that have had gambling problems, the ideas of the things that you actually do in treatment, which I'm assuming are going to be very similar to what people with substance abuse, working on self-esteem, relapse prevention, and things of that nature. Is that similar to what it is? Because you went to a specific program for gambling.
I did, and I think there, if I'm correct, there's only 3 or 4 treatment facilities inpatient in this country that are specifically designed for gambling addiction. And I went to one of them called Project Turnabout. It's in Granite Falls, Minnesota, and it's kind of out in the middle of nowhere. And for me, I didn't have any expectations. My brain was so foggy when I walked into that place. I had no real idea what I was in for. But the first, several days was them trying to explain to me what was going on with me. And my questions to the professionals and the therapists were, how can I do the things I'm doing when I know they're wrong? Why am I doing that? I know they're wrong. I know there are consequences, but I'm still doing them. So my opinion of myself was so low. I was convinced that I was a bad person, and I had no real idea what was going on inside my head. And so basically they had to walk me off the ledge and let me decompress and clear my head to understand really what was going on.
And how long were you in treatment?
It was 30 days.
30 days. Okay. And so what are the things did you come up with any answers?
Well, once I started to learn about the process, of addiction and dopamine in the brain and what that does, what that does to your thinking, your choices, and what's going on, then I really started to figure it out, or not figure it out, but I really started to understand it, have a better understanding of what this was. It's for somebody that's a raging gambling addict like I was. You get to a point where you're not even living in reality, and you're not understanding why you're doing what you're doing. And so, yeah, we sat down and it was a 12-step based program, which is similar to, a lot of other treatment centers that deal with alcohol or drug addiction. And, I bought into it, and it slowly but surely, it gave me, when I left there, I had a plan. I wasn't nearly where I am now, obviously, but I had a plan in place, and I had the tools to handle what I was going to come across and the things I was going to face down the road.
Yeah, and that's exactly where that real correlation hits with drugs and behavioral addiction. Dopamine. I mean, that's everything it's about. There's a reward deficiency. That seeking of pleasure, and ultimately how that eventually starts affecting your prefrontal cortex and your thinking, and it shuts all that down.
Yeah, and I had no idea, Eric. I had no idea what any of that meant at the time, and now that I'm educated on it and I know what all the what's going on in the brain, it makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm. Now you do. I wanted to ask you on like relapse prevention. Now, so obviously for certain behavioral addictions, obviously it's not about completely giving up everything. Obviously, with like eating addictions, you have to eat. um, sex addicts, it's always not necessarily about completely giving that up. But I'm assuming with gambling, it is. It's something that you do not even touch. You don't go near. You don't play poker with friends. Is that?
I don't even dabble in it. To me, the way I look in my mind, I have a relapse in me, but I don't have another recovery in me, and that's how I look at this. I can't go down that road again because of where it took me before, and it scares the hell out of me. And so I have, I've had moments, not as much now, but early on in my recovery, where I did have thoughts of gambling, and you get that delusional thinking going again, and you got to snap yourself out of it. And I have the tools and the what I learned in treatment, basically the tools to handle those situations. But it's as I say this a lot, I like to stay on the edge. I don't ever want to get too comfortable with my recovery. I don't want to ever get to the point where I think that I've got this and I'm fixed, I'm over it, because I know that if I ever decide to go down that road, it's going to be it's going to be quick, and it's going to be fast, and it's not going to be pretty.
Yeah. I mean, you kind of described cravings. I mean, that's basically, when you were saying that you think about it, it'll come up, and, so you have cravings, for doing it. What are the tools that you gain? Are you still a member of the 12-step program?
I am. Yeah. And early on, one of the most important things for me was Gamblers Anonymous, and it still is. I don't go to as many meetings as I used to go to early on, but what that did for me was I was able to be around my people, as I describe it, people like me, because when you make the choices I made and you do the things I did, you get to the point where you think there's nobody like me. I mean, nobody would do the things I did to feed my addiction. But then you surround yourself with the people that understand you because they're living it just like you are. That helped me, and then further along, a couple of years down the road, I was able to help other people. And for somebody that had spent so many years taking from people, financially, emotionally, spiritually, to be able to give back and to be able to help somebody is a huge deal to me, and that it just further solidified my belief in recovery and treatment and the 12-step program, which I really do believe in.
I like what you said there, because I look at, like, with my story, I wrote a book called Pain, Failure, and Misery: The Stepping Stones to Success. And the first part of the book is my story. So it's kind of an autobiography in the very beginning, that then goes into, healing yourself and, a lot of different stuff. And I describe in my story, and I was originally kind of fearful of even putting this stuff out there because, again, with the criminal aspects. But when I was doing methamphetamine, I committed an average of about 10 residential burglaries a night, and never luckily running into anybody while doing it, never got arrested for those types of things. And I got heavily into the 12-step program too when I eventually got out of custody. And you hit that 8th step and that 9th step of making amends. And I remember, and I was talking to my sponsor about it, that I don't even know where to begin with that, because I couldn't even tell you the most of the places that I did it, because my head was just so foggy, so out there. But that's where I started going with things. I started thinking, what, if I can reach out, if I can help people, if I can do things. It was one of the big reasons I got into the industry of working with substance abuse, clientele and stuff, was that mindset, to be able to give back, to be able to make my amends through giving back to our community and to our society, by hopefully helping to curb this substance abuse issue and behavioral addictions and mental illness as well.
That's well said. I couldn't agree more with that. For me, I think early on in my recovery, like I said, the first maybe year or two, I wanted people to know that I was doing well. I wanted to make amends. I wanted to go out of my way to kind of tell people, hey, I'm doing really well and this is what I'm doing. And I reached a point, where I don't know, a light went off in my head. It's, my words don't mean a whole lot right now. So what I need to do is just show it through my actions and to be able to give back. And I reached a point where I no longer, that we talk about the stigma and the shame and everything that comes along with it. And I was afraid to go to the grocery store for a while, just for fear of God. I'm going to run into somebody that I ripped off or run into somebody that I lied to, and then that's that shame and that guilt. Once I was able to get past that and realize that I had the ability to help people, I just decided it doesn't really matter what I say, it's what I do.
Mm-hmm. And that's why, that thing, we always say, don't say you're sorry, because how many times have we said we were sorry? Over and over and over, and it means nothing. My parents, for instance, I've dragged my parents through hell, with all of my, things that I've done over the years, and there were a lot of times they didn't know if I was alive or dead, just would disappear and be gone. And it was like that, you come back and, oh, I'm so sorry, but it means nothing until you can show the changes within you, that it's about doing. It's not about saying. We can say anything, just like you had said, when you're out there, you can come up with all kinds of bullshit lies that, that,
for sure,
will easily manipulate people, but you can't hide your behavior. So that's where people get caught in their lies,
Yeah. And you talk about behaviors, and that's another, I gambled for so many years, and I had all of these behaviors that I had developed through the course of my addiction. And it wasn't like I just left treatment and all of a sudden those behaviors went away. It took me, a few years. I was still doing things almost by default, that I used to do with no, I didn't have any bad intentions, but I would lie about something, or I would misdirect or do something. And I would stop and I think, why are you doing that? You don't need to do that anymore. It's these ingrained behaviors that I had that it took a long time to get past that.
Does your wife have more faith in you today?
Yeah, she does. She does have more faith in me. We have a really we have a really solid foundation that we continue to build upon. For me, I was exposed, and that's why I tell people that are struggling and having a hard time owning up to where they're at is, the best thing you can do is expose yourself and that's the first step for me. Was just, once I was exposed, there was nothing else. There was nothing else for me to hide. And so we've been able to build, and it's been a daily process over the course of the last 6 years. But once I was able to regain her trust, we got to a place in our marriage where, we started to build that foundation again. But I will say this too, Eric, I'm fortunate because I've seen, as have you, many addicts that didn't get that opportunity, didn't get that second chance from their wife, girlfriend, boy, whatever. My wife, when we reached a point where she was able to pinpoint what the core of the root of the problem was, which was my gambling, she got involved. She wanted to learn about it. She got involved in Gam-Anon, the spouse of the gambler. They go to meetings too, and they share their stories as spouses, what they've been through, what their spouses put them through. And she learned and she educated herself, and she gave me a chance, and not everybody gets that. So I'm pretty fortunate.
Yeah, I was thinking on, the behavioral stuff is very powerful. And I was thinking, when I was in custody, and I remember that I got to a place where I said, you know what, my drug of choice was actually adrenaline and dopamine. I mean, that was my drug of choice, and, when I had, with all of the behaviors and all the stuff that I was doing and the adrenaline of, again, breaking into houses and doing all this kind of stuff, there was so much adrenaline that went along with that. That was difficult to give up as well, and it was not, so it wasn't only the chemicals, but it was all of those behavioral stuff, which again goes back to high while clean, which is we can still get high, but we can do it clean.
We can, yeah, for sure. And I've found, different things and different ways to live my life now without gambling. And it's definitely been an adjustment because I couldn't go a day without it. And now the thought of it makes me sick to my stomach, and I've found other things I love my job. I love my family, things to excite me on a daily basis and keep me going and keep me motivated.
Do you have days still where you struggle, or?
Yeah, like anybody, I think, I do have days where I struggle, but it's not so much because I'm struggling with, the thoughts of gambling and the thrill that used to bring me. It's my struggles now are when I take a step back and think about, wow, I still have a lot of money to pay back, a lot of restitution I'm still paying back, and I've paid a ton over the last 6 years. But if I start to dwell on that, those are my struggles. If I start to dwell on how much damage I did, even though I don't dwell on it too often, I can still fall back into that from time to time. Wow, look at all these friendships I ruined, and I'll never get those back. So I can kind of fall into that a little bit, but fortunately I'm able to kind of snap out of it and not let it sink me.
And you define like gambling as gambling, so that it's like you're not going to slot machines, or because sports betting was your thing, so you lump all that together, right?
Right. It's all the same to me. I mean, whether it's slot machines or sports betting, but it's all the same. I don't touch it. I don't go near it. At work, if somebody's doing a Super Bowl thing, I politely decline, you know what I mean? And I don't engage in it. And I don't spend a whole lot of time worrying about how that looks to somebody else. Whereas before I always used to worry about how everything looked to people, and this is how I do it now. And, I'm confident enough in what I'm doing and how I'm going about it that keeps me going.
So if you were to say something to, people out there that are struggling with this, or having issues related to this, what would you tell them?
First thing I would say is that it can get better. The one thing I learned early on in my treatment was it may seem dark now. Your life may seem like there's no light, but if you expose yourself and you talk to somebody about this problem, do it now and don't wait, because the longer you wait, the worse it's going to get. The consequences are going to be that much more severe. But the main thing is, if it may seem dark now, but it can get better through treatment, which I'm a firm believer in, and recovery. You can get your life back.
It's so interesting talking to you about this, because you literally sound like could be the drug addict, could be it's all the same thing.
Well, I'll tell you, I've come across people just like you have, and I'm early on. I'm only 6 years in recovery, so it's not like I've been doing this for 20 years, but I've come across alcoholics, drug addicts in jail. A lot of drug addicts I talked to in jail, and to me, it's addiction, and whether it's meth or heroin or, scotch or gambling, whatever, it's addiction. And it's, how do we get through this, and what can we do? And we need to seek help if we feel like we have no help. And, that's the main thing with me.
And that's important, because addiction is addiction. And I like that you said that, because I've seen a lot of people that, will get off heroin, or they get off meth, or they get off coke, and then they go start to gamble, or they switch into another addiction. Addiction is addiction, and it's the same thing. Now, most people will eventually resort back to what they really like, what their preferred is, but that is a common thing. Again, people get off substances, then they go into some other obsessive, disorder.
Yeah, that's another thing too. Yeah, I learned early on is okay, great. Well, let's take care of your gambling addiction, but okay, so you're coming off of one addiction, there's a tendency to gravitate towards something else, right? And so, how do we manage that? For me, it was alcohol. We talked about that early on. If I was going to fall into something else, it would have been alcohol, because gambling and alcohol are really, they're tied together. And I was drinking too much back then. Towards the end of my gambling days, I would drink almost to fall asleep, just to numb the pain. And so I had to watch that early on, and I'm still aware of it. I still kind of, it's in the back of my mind. I never lose sight of the fact that I could fall into something else if I'm not careful.
Do you drink, or are you sober?
I do, but my wife and I talk about it a lot, and that's, that would be more of a concern for both of us now than the gambling, to be honest with you, just because that, I still do it, but I'm aware of it, and I don't, I don't get carried away with it, but the possibility exists if I'm not careful.
Absolutely. Addiction is addiction.
That's it. Yeah. That's very true.
Yeah. It's, that's why, for me, I'm very careful what I take. I'm very careful in what I do, because I can. I'm the person that can become a workaholic. I have to watch that. I have to, make sure that I'm spending time with my wife and doing the family stuff and, all the other things, because it's easy for me to do that. I get, obsessed with something.
No, I can relate to that. And I do that as well. I sometimes work too much, because I enjoy it for one, but we have that in us, right? It's whether it's working or whatever, sometimes we can take it a little bit too far, and I'll sometimes get a little bit too consumed with work and need to take a step back and realize, okay, well, it's family time now, or, let's make time for your family this weekend and don't plan on working or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So what do you do today for your recovery then? I mean, you said you do go to some 12-step Gamblers Anonymous. What are other things that you do for yourself?
So I read a lot about it. I take time. I try and take time every day just by myself in the mornings when I'm going to work or coming back from work in the evenings. I listen to a lot. I just listen to a lot of different podcasts. I listen to a lot of different people that specialize in addiction, that know what recovery is like. I am not going to as many meetings now because it's just right now there aren't many to go to. And I talk about it a lot. I talk about it with people at work, not necessarily my situation, but again, addiction in general. And that it keeps me engaged. And the more I talk about it, the more I share my story, the more I reach out to other people that are struggling, the more it keeps me engaged and the more it keeps me focused on what I need to focus on, which is my recovery.
Now, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you'd like to talk about?
I think the one thing that is real important to me is with gambling addiction, a lot of people don't realize this, and I didn't either until I learned about it. The suicide rate for gambling addicts is really high. And the reason it's so high is because we do so much financial damage. And so for me, I wasn't on the verge. I was in the process of planning how I was going to kill myself. I wanted to try and make it look like an accident, make sure my life insurance was in place. And so in a sick, twisted sort of way, I was even gambling with the fact that, okay, I'm going to try and kill myself, but I don't know if the insurance company is going to pay it out or not. So, we get to a point where it's so dark and we have done so much financial damage that we can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. And so I just want people to know that, one, the suicide prevention line is a real thing. That's important to me, because if you're on the edge, you can always call somebody and somebody will help you. And so I just want people to know that.
Yeah, and that's that desperation phase that you're talking about.
Right. You just get to a point where there's no hope. You can't see any way out of your mess.
Yeah. And I think it is important for people to know, I mean, no matter, how bad it's gotten, there are solutions. There are people that are there to help, that you don't have to do this alone. And I think that is very important for people to understand.
Yeah, you don't have to do it alone. And I didn't. Like I say, the first couple of years of my recovery, I spent most of my time, if I wasn't at home with my family, most of my time was spent in meetings or talking with people that could relate to my situation and I could relate to theirs, because that's what kept me, that is what kept me grounded at that time. And so that's real important.
And I want to thank everybody for tuning in to another episode of High While Clean. Let's keep getting high, but let's do it clean. I'll see you soon.
Take back your story. Show the